my name's James Loudon. I'm an associate professor of anthropology at East Carolina University. And I'm here with Mel Quitman, who was my former neighbor and who's actually got a lot of skill sets in terms of developing podcasts. I have none. But I do teach a course on the anthropology of monsters at East Carolina University, where I'm employed, called the Anthropology of Monsters, Vampires, and Zombies. I think I got that title right. We decided to call this podcast the Monsterpology of Humans. Monsterpology, it's just a play on words. I guess you could refer to that. It would translate roughly into the formal study of monsters. And I think it's kind of a catchy term because, as we'll talk, I guess what we'll explore in this podcast is that monsters are just manifestations of humans. They're the things that we make up. And so, and I think in some ways one of the primary sort of functions of this podcast is to have fun and, to talk about monsters. And there's no shortage of monsters to discuss, because you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of human cultures, and all those human cultures have their own types of monsters, or they have variants on some of the few monsters that we might consider universal, such as a ghost or something. So it is my hope that we sort of deconstruct monsters from an academic perspective, and use what we know about biology and disease and epidemiology and evolution and anthropology and folklore to understand monsters and some of the superpowers that they have or some of their weaknesses, and sort of maybe interpret what they are to the people that create those monsters.
That's so crazy. Like this, I can't be more excited about being a part of this, man. Like, I remember when you mentioned it, like you said, you mentioned we used to be next door neighbors and everything, and you had mentioned what you do. I'm like, what? What is this? Teach me more. I want to know more. I've always had a fascination with like the vampires, the werewolves, all that kind of stuff. But I never really thought about there being that same version of a vampire, a werewolf in, say, Tanzania or Mongolia or anything like that. I just assumed it was all just everybody just thinks of a vampire as Dracula and a werewolf as, like not Teen Wolf, but like American Werewolf in London or type deal. You know what I mean? I had no idea. I never thought about it being, spread out like it is.
Yeah, and you made a really interesting point when you said a vampire being associated with Dracula, because Dracula is this sort of iconic vampire. But vampires are, you find there's different versions of vampires all throughout Eastern Europe, and there's vampires outside of Europe. But this one really, really iconic book called Dracula is associated with vampires. It's kind of like calling a facial tissue Kleenex. If you ask somebody, hey, pass a Kleenex, and they look at you like, I don't know what you're talking about. Are you referring to the facial tissue? You wouldn't have that problem because Kleenex it's a brand, but it's associated with all types of facial tissues. But yeah, I mean, it's what's interesting about monsters is, we create them. So just backing up, I mean, I guess this first podcast, we can just kind of talk about, anthropology and monsters. Anthropology is the study of humans. And it's trying to understand humans from a historical perspective or an archaeological perspective, a biological and an evolutionary perspective, a cross-cultural perspective. So within a subculture within a society, or comparing different cultures. And then from linguistics, which is the study of human language, how cultures transmitted from both, laterally from one person to another, but also vertically. You learn, language from your parents or from those who are older than you. So anthropology is in many ways well suited to study monsters. And so, although we'll be like, I think, in this podcast, we'll be drawing in, aspects of psychology and neurobiology and epidemiology, and, because I'm trained as an anthropologist, I guess we'll kind of rely on my, expertise.
And plan on doing a lot of explaining, because all these ologies and all this stuff, I'm a dumb jock. I'm a football player. I didn't put a lot of time into learning, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And everything in school. So I'm going to take this as basically a college course for myself in all of this.
Well, if you were going to ask me how to identify a zone defense, I would be lost. So,
Right.
So it's all about what you have training in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And whenever I'm watching the, football, and they're like, that's a dime or a nickel formation, I'm like, I have no idea what that
That's
is.
where it loses you.
Yeah. But I
Got you.
I know what a first down is, and if you can get
there you go.
It's a good, So we'll go through all of that, and as we sort of, I guess, navigate forward in this podcast.
Right.
So, I guess, one of the things that I do, so when I teach the class, and as we start moving forward, the first question, I guess, or the first thing to even think about, there's a couple things just fundamental to a podcast, I guess, on monsters, or a course on monsters, and that is, what is a monster? And I think the beautiful thing about a podcast or a class or even a book on this is there's no one's an expert. You can dedicate your life to studying monsters, but monsters you find them in every society. And one of the beautiful things about teaching this course is undergraduates love, they love learning about monsters, but they also know of all these other monsters that I've never heard of, because they're on Reddit and they're on boards and they're, reading threads, and they're always coming up to me and asking me, have you ever heard of this monster? Have you ever heard of that monster? And I haven't. And so that's the thing that's fascinating about monsters, is there's new ones coming up. There's new fears that are coming up, and it's hard to keep your kind of to keep a handle on all of the monsters and the evolution of monsters and their new abilities. So that's what's fun about, exploring monsters, either formally or informally, like we're doing.
That's interesting. So there's still new versions of. So when you say there's still new monsters coming up, are there still new versions of the older monsters, or they're just totally new species of monsters out there?
Well, there's both. I mean, do you remember when we were younger, zombies always moved slowly?
Yes.
And they just sort of lumbered on. And I remember when I saw that movie years ago, 28 Days or 28 Days Later, and the zombies were fast. And I remember it just being, I was like, well, wait a minute, zombies don't move fast. And so like, this was zombies, they, and again, that term is, comes from sort of, West Africa, which we can do an entire, our series of podcasts just on zombies from West Africa, and their links to Haiti, and then ultimately how they sort of came into the United States, and people made movies and books and a lot of money off them. But yeah, just zombies themselves in our lifetime went from these things that were slow and lumbering to being able to move fast. And then sort of what is how does one become a zombie? Well, in those earlier films, I mean, they were just sort of, there was no real explanation. And then in other films, or series, it's a virus. Or it's maybe, I don't know, in some cases, maybe a prion or a fungus, cordyceps fungus. So you're taking this old idea, this idea of a monster, and it's evolving, and it's evolving new abilities, or the causative agents of those zombies are new. So yeah, monsters themselves are not stagnant or static. They are dynamic, and they're always evolving. And one of the things I tell students about this class when I teach it, or if you listen to this podcast, is this gives you a foundation if you're a creative writer, or if you want to write short stories, just to think about things and understand the scientific world, or the natural world, and use a scientific approach. And all your answers and all your research questions can come from that. And then if you have any degree of creativity, you can create monsters or take existing monsters and change them in fascinating ways. So,
Wow.
Yeah, it's just
that's great. That's amazing. That's incredible. So so there could be so say I'm just drawing like as a kid creating monsters in my head, right?
Mm-hmm.
And say I picture, I don't know, a 4-armed thing, walking on 2 legs and that kind of thing. Are you saying that there could be an evolved monster to that level?
Well, when it comes so if we think about this from like a practical perspective, like how you would sort of create a monster like that. Well, if we're talking about something like humanoid, we generally think, okay, humans got 2 legs and 2 arms. But then if you want to make it into something monstrous, right? Something that's actually imbues fear, then what do you do to it? Well, you disfigure it in some way, or you give it more limbs, or you take off fewer limbs, or you don't take a nose, take a nose away, or something like that. So yeah, just sort of embellish, or embellish an existing sort of accepted sort of reality of what a human is, or a cow, or whatever, or sort of embellish it, or take some parts away from it, and then have it become monstrous. And usually, associated with monsters is this idea of fear, like humans are afraid. Right. That's really the interesting thing about any of these monsters. I mean, there are monsters that people aren't afraid of, like Casper the Friendly Ghost. Right? Nobody's really afraid of Casper. But that's the whole point with Casper, is that he's not supposed to scare you.
He's friendly, yeah. He's the friendly ghost.
He's supposed to help you out, right?
Yeah. So that's interesting. Like you said, how a lot of the monsters and the urban legends and the myths and everything like that are based around fear.
Yes.
Right?
So yeah, fear is an interesting concept, right? So fear. So let's talk about. I'll get to monsters and then we'll do fear real quick. So monsters, if you define a monster, it's oftentimes referred to as something as ugly. People refer to their children or as monstrous, but that's more in a humorous text. Or my dog's a monster. But that's really, it's sort of being, kind of humorous or ridiculing or a play on words. But monsters are, they associated with monsters generally is this concept of fear. So they're ugly, they're large. There's been a lot written on human monsters, and one of the things that many monsters can do is eat you, which I always find interesting because humans eat other animals, and we have no problem with that.
And there's no problem with that.
No. We eat. You'll eat a chicken sandwich, or I'll eat a chicken sandwich. I don't eat meat. You know this.
Right.
Something that I don't like the taste of meat. It's lovely tasting, but I don't eat it for my own personal reasons. But we meet all the time, and we're indifferent to the fact that was an animal. And when we think about ourselves being eaten, even if it's not a fantastic monster, if it's like a lion or a tiger or a wolf or a bear, they themselves can be considered monstrous. The other thing that those animals have is super strength compared to us. A bear is many times stronger than a human. So really, when you think about an animal that's 40 times stronger than you, well, really, when it comes to brute strength, they're a superhero, because there's really nothing you can do against them. I mean, you can try to put them in a jiu-jitsu chokehold, or you can try to run away, and it's not going to work. So yeah, one of the things that's interesting about them is again, they imbue fear. So fear is something that we all have, and some of our fears are rational. And some of our fears are completely irrational. And my fears aren't necessarily the same thing as your fears. I'm afraid to go on roller coasters. And I don't like I don't like the sense of being out of control. And so some people have no fear of roller coasters whatsoever. You know, the worst thing, if you're going to an amusement park to go on a roller coaster, the most dangerous part of it is driving to the amusement park, right? It's more dangerous to get on a highway.
Right.
I mean, you have a higher likelihood of getting hit, getting maimed in a car than you actually do on a roller coaster. But what they're selling you is fear. This fear that you're going to go, you know, hundreds of feet in the air, then drop down at 60 miles per hour and go through loop-de-loops and corkscrews. You're more safe in that little cockpit of a roller coaster than you are. But that's
crazy.
Isn't that interesting to think about?
That is so interesting because I'm terrified of the pirate ship thing that goes back and forth, and then it'll get stuck upside down like that, and then go back. Oh yeah, no. That's my biggest fear from a roller coaster.
I'm with you. I'm with you 100%. You know,
I think it's terrifying.
It is, and like, but and then other people are just, you know, when I teach this class, I'll have the students raise their hands, and the amount of students that are actually afraid of spiders. You know, and spiders are interesting because, yeah, there's a few of them that can actually hurt you, but I mean, think about it. You're talking about an animal that, you know, just weighs a few grams, and, you know, and they can't eat you. They could just potentially bite you. And yeah, they can, you know, and it's a very, very small percentage of them. When you think about the entire, you know, all the different species can actually hurt you, but we have an irrational fear of them. You know, we have fears of snakes and fears of roaches. Even roaches don't generally bite people, but it's very odd. So, you know, there are things, whether they're harmful or they're harmless, that can, you know, imbue fear in us. And the interesting thing, of course, is when we let those fears get the best of us and we start, you know, engaging in some of the worst elements of humans, right? So genocide, ethnic cleansing, racism, you know, hate, you know, misogyny, anti-Semitism, all of these sorts of things. When we let that fear sort of parasitize those higher functions of our brain. And that's when humans actually become the real monsters, right? We become the manifestations of the things that we say we're not. But yeah, there was this idea of phobos, you know, like xenophobia and arachnophobia. Apparently, it was actually named after the god Phobos, who was a Greek god. And I think he was the son of Aphrodite, and the god of beauty and love, and the god Ares, the god of war. And he was actually, you know, people, you know, the Greeks actually were, you know, they I guess they worshipped him, or they revered him in some ways, or they were afraid of him because when you got possessed by fear, I mean, your higher functions would shut down, and if you're on a battlefield, maybe you'd run away, or you would get stricken with anxiety, become paralyzed with fear. So it's funny how there's that term phobia that's associated with this god Phobos that most of us have never really heard. And I was actually listening to a podcast on warfare, and that's where I kind of heard about it. So that's
crazy.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
That's very interesting. Very interesting. So what about my fear of clowns? Like,
of what?
What's clowns? What's up with that?
What clams?
Clowns.
That's such an interesting one. Yeah, you know, I think, you know, I read one time that Johnny Depp has that same fear. And
I'll take that. Well, for some reasons, I'll be happy about being in the class.
Sure. But but you know, the reason I use him is because, you know, he's an actor, and he has been around, you know, all his like sets and studios and stuff, and so he knows how, you know, you can take a person and dress them up as a clown, and
no doubt. I mean, Edward Scissorhands, you know, like that kind of guy.
Yeah, sure.
Charlie from Charlie, the Willy Wonka from the Charlie Factory.
Yeah, all of that. I mean, so
yeah,
he
all that
knows
kind of stuff. Yeah,
he knows like the process by which you just take an actor and dress them up. And yeah, I don't know. I'm sure that's a really good question for a psychologist. But yeah, but I mean, the thing about fear oftentimes is it can be linked to your childhood. It could be linked to your personality. It could be linked to a type of event. It's weird how sometimes you'll never be afraid of anything, and then somebody will tell you about it, and then it just completely changes your trajectory or your approach to the world. And maybe did you ever have a bad experience with a clown?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Yeah, but you don't
Nothing
like
that
them?
I'm aware of. I know that I remember going to a circus when I was a kid and not being able to make it into the circus itself because I saw a clown like in the little event area, or
Sure.
somebody just dressed up as a clown, you know what I mean, in the event area, freaked out, and
Sure.
I didn't go back into another circus until I had kids myself.
Wow. So what happens when you see one now?
I get a little uneasy, and it didn't help learning because I remember reading in my psychology class in high school, they dove deep into serial killers.
Yeah.
And, the William Gacy that dressed up as, I think, was it John Wayne Gacy? William Gacy, the actor, sorry. Yeah, John Wayne Gacy, the clown killer.
Yeah.
And I think learning about that even terrified me even more.
Didn't help.
And
well, that's
it's crazy. Even the movie It, like I've seen it once. I don't need to see all these new versions or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like I don't like clowns. I don't trust.
Yeah, and I think that's like, isn't that one of like the ultimate evil is to dress up as as something, the personification of somebody who's happy and joyful and befriends children, but in reality is evil and has ulterior motives. Like John Wayne Gacy's dressing up like a clown, but he's not like he's doing it because he was a good person. And
not dog.
Pennywise,
trying to get an edge.
Yeah, exactly. And Pennywise and It was like getting those kids to go down in the gutter and stuff,
right,
horrifying.
Right. And that kind of ties back into, like the Dracula or the vampire. In a lot of movies they come off as a smooth, suave character, but they want to suck your blood and stuff, you know what I mean? So that kind of ties into that also.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you mentioned that because vampires are one of the few monsters out there that are sexy.
Yes.
Nobody sees a zombie or a ghoul and it's like, wow, I want to have sex with that, right? Or,
right.
I mean, no, they're their skin's falling off and their eyeballs, but they're undead or they're reanimated. But the same thing as a vampire, apparently it's undead, it's died and then came back from the living. But and we know what happens with a body when it dies. It immediately starts shutting down and its flesh starts coming off and they start stinking. But vampires somehow transcend that. And to your point, they're suave and sexy and beautiful and take a tiny little bite out of it.
Take a little bite out of you. I mean, sometimes, especially, you'll see a movie or whatever, and you'll see the person before they turn into the vampire, right?
Yeah.
Once they turn into the vampire, they're even more attractive and more smooth and more suave. And I mean, it's incredible to see. I love that.
Oh yeah, you can take like the biggest dork, and then they get like somebody who can't dress themselves, they get bit by a vampire. The next thing you know, they're wearing
long black clothes, their hair grows long and pretty flowing hair. And so all of a sudden, it's crazy.
Yeah, they're automatically this full of mane of hair. Yeah.
So where do you have any ideas or theories of where does that part of, I guess, the vampire or Dracula, is that just from the story and then it's just been adapted into all these movie versions? Like the the stand-up male or the whatever, the person walking around amongst everybody else.
Sure.
In, you know, vampire-y, gory looking. He's a good-looking person normally.
Yeah.
Is that just an adaptation from the story?
Yeah, in some ways, yeah, because you know when you think about you know, vampires. If you look at them from different perspectives, I mean, not all of them. Like if you look at them at different cultures, they're not all beautiful, and you know, they're not all, you know, like you said, suave and sophisticated. Like a lot of them actually, you know, do things like hop. And one of the reasons they might be hopping, same thing with some of these descriptions of zombies. It's because they have rigor mortis and they no longer, you know, have the ability to you know to move their joints. But when we think about, you know, lots of Western vampires, you know, in Dracula, it's Count Dracula, right? It's somebody who's sophisticated, somebody who's you know, back in the day, if you were a count, well, you know, not everybody was educated back then. And so if you were a count, then you had some sort of formal education or you're part of a royal court. You had wealth. You probably spoke several languages. You could read. You could count. I mean, all these things that we take for granted now that lots of people, you know, in the past, I mean, not everybody could count very well and not everybody was bound to their own budgets, and they were going to markets to trade, you know, whatever they could grow or whatever they, you know, how many eggs they harvested. And you know, they probably didn't have any books, you know, they couldn't afford them. They were hard to come by. So somebody who was a count was a sophisticant. And in this case, with, you know, the idea of Dracula, it's, you know, it makes for a better story, right? If just, you know, if Billy the peasant becomes a vampire, well, Billy, you know, that would be in some ways a really good story. But if somebody who's powerful, intellectual, and a person of influence becomes a vampire, I think it makes for a more compelling story. You know, it's such a compelling story that hundreds of years later, Dracula is still something that, how many times have they remade that movie? Right? So many times, because it just never gets old. You know, and we can talk about this as you know, later. We should probably do, you know, a couple of podcasts on the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is just, you know, the first of these stories. And then when you start thinking about so many stories, whether we're talking about monsters or just talking about, you know, romantic comedies and stuff, a lot of them are based on this very, very ancient Babylonian story of a Sumerian. Actually, it's not even Babylonian. It predates the Babylonian. Sumerian story of Gilgamesh.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Vampire in Brooklyn.
Oh yeah.
Eddie Murphy. I know it's a comedy and everything about it, but everything about that version of a vampire, I loved it.
Sure.
I loved it. Like, he was funny, but he was cool. You know what I mean?
He
was super intelligent. He was smooth as hell. I mean, he got Angela Bassett in the movie. I mean,
oh gosh, stunning.
It's funny. I got that mixed up with Interview with the Vampire because I just watched that new series of Interview with the Vampire. I don't know if you're familiar with that either.
Oh, yeah, I knew it came. Where's it on?
Good. It's on. I want to say Amazon Prime, maybe, or Max, or, you know, HBO Max, or one of them. It's a streaming service for sure. Yeah,
you know what? It's funny that you mentioned that because it just popped up on my feed the other day.
Oh wow, it's good because I love the movie. I remember going to the movie theater and seeing that movie, and I loved it then, and I love this new series. It was a good take on it for sure.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because today, a couple hours ago, actually, before we decided to record this, I was watching Lost Boys, which is yeah.
Oh man, it's so good, so good.
Yeah, it was such a good show, you know.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I haven't watched too many of the new horror movies. I'm sure that some.
Me neither.
What?
Me neither.
Yeah,
me neither. I used to love. Well, see, I can't even say they're horror because, I mean, Freddy Krueger was never scary to me.
Okay.
Freddy Krueger, you know, he was hilarious. He was funny to me.
Sure, he was pretty funny.
I mean, I was more scared of like the Michael Myers.
Oh yeah.
The kind of person that could actually escape from a mental institution and want to kill people.
Oh
You know
yeah,
what I mean?
well, I mean, they sold that, didn't they?
Oh, so well, so well.
I mean, yeah, the fact that and all he had was, I mean, that just, I guess he had super strength and everything, but I mean, he was just that idea. There's that presence of him, right? And
He seemed like he was 8 feet tall.
Yeah,
just huge, just terrifying. Loved it.
Well, and then that little piano like riff that they do.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, it's spooky.
Oh, so scary.
And it's
so
just
scary.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because like you think about that riff on a cello with Jaws. I think it's cello they play for Jaws. I mean, it's just really a simple. I mean, I can't play a cello or a piano, so I'm not saying hats off to anyone who can. Your orders of magnitude, you're in a different universe than I am. But I've talked to people that are like, oh yeah, the Jaws whatever note or whatever
right.
Playing the Jaws theme is pretty simple compared to like trying to play something that maybe Mozart or Bach wrote, but it
served its purpose.
Yeah
It served its purpose for sure, man.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that, and I love the idea of this podcast. I love learning. I like learning, and I feel like I'm going to learn a lot of stuff, and I feel like you're going to teach me and the listeners and viewers a whole lot of stuff we didn't know, and just more stuff that we might have known and just, forgot about maybe, or just all kinds of good stuff, man. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, and I mean, I really, sort of my vision of this is that we put this out there, and people that are listening can add, or make suggestions or correct, or even ask, for clarification, or to maybe talk about a specific type of monster. I'll talk about some of them that I know of through my travels abroad. Because
you've been all over the place, right?
Yeah, my fair share of places, and so I'd be more than happy to talk about some of them and go into more in depth. But like the thing is, like, monsters are always evolving. Well, another example, we're talking about new monsters. A monster that didn't exist when we were young is Slender Man.
Oh wow, yeah.
And that was a monster. Yeah. Remember the first time I heard about that and I heard about it the first time about 10 years ago, and I'm sure it's older than that. But like, that was something that was a manifestation of that new generation.
Totally. When you don't ever even think of Slender Man, ever.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? I was just like, and who figured this out? I mean, it was obviously some community, and I mean, and the idea was so good that it, went from that community and it became regional, and then it became sort of a thing that, became a national event, and then people started being afraid of it, and if you were to ask, someone from our generation about Slender Man, first of all, we'd say, what the hell's a Slender Man?
Like, what is a Slender Man? Like, what are you trying to say? What are you trying to say about it?
Exactly. I've been going to the gym every day. Yeah. Right. So, yeah, I always think that's, when I think about new monsters being created, there's also this new fear that you may have heard of called nomophobia. Nomophobia, the fear of losing your phone, or the fear of not getting a cellular connection or a Wi-Fi connection, or the fear that your phone is going to run out of batteries.
Wow.
Nobody had that fear until we were reliant on our phones. I mean, if you were to ask people before, even in cell phones. Remember when we first had cell phones?
Yeah.
I remember the first ones were the bricks, and then when they became affordable, I had a Nokia, and then I was a cool guy because I had a Razor.
You were a cool guy, yeah.
Oh yeah, but I got it years later. I got a Razor when they weren't cool anymore, but it was.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and then I got the iPhone, and so, but. There was never we never had fear when we were kids of losing a phone because nobody had. None
whatsoever. I was more worried about losing one of my G.I. Joe action figures.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
The worst is when you lost their guns. You're like,
that was the worst.
That's the worst. What are you supposed to do? G.I. Joe doesn't have a gun. Like,
you know what I mean? Hopefully they're hand-to-hand combat.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, I mean, I think this stuff's all really interesting. Like, you know, how monsters can, you know, kind of develop out of, you know, people or subculture or what have you. Or in the case of Slenderman, I think it was developed by young people. And then the ideas are persuasive enough that people are willing to buy into them and then willing to be afraid of them. And then how new fears can actually develop. And this whole idea that, you know, these psychologists have studied these, I think they call it phantom bone vibration. I know the technical term. But nobody would ever have that, really ever had that. And then you feel your leg vibrate and you go to look at your phone and your phone's not even in your pocket. Well, nobody had that sensation before. And so this new technology is not only, you know, linked to, you know, changing our perceptions of the natural world we live in, but also creating fears. And I think we've all done it where we looked at our phone and oh, man, I only have 8% battery. What am I going to do?
100%.
Yeah.
100% have done that. Freaking out. Freaking out about it.
Or just lose just get pissed at the world because you can't get your internet connection, right? I don't tend to get afraid. I just tend to get irate at the universe, right?
Definitely. I take it out. I definitely take it out on the world.
Yeah, exactly. It's like somebody's going to have to pay for this. Yeah. You know, it's funny stuff. And that's what, I mean, I guess one of the funny things about doing like this, you know, talking about monsters is it's so easy to go right into like how being afraid of something and then go get it into your own daily life and how you know, it impacts you in ways that you probably never really thought of.
Right. How times have changed. We're afraid of losing our phones. People hundreds and thousands of years ago were afraid of Dracula, possibly. Yeah. And vampires.
Oh yeah. Or not feeding your kids. I guess we still are afraid of that. But yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Plague and all kinds of stuff. We're terrified of losing our phones, man.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. Or getting
We're ruined. We are ruined.
I know. I mean, some of the things some of the things we're afraid of are just our real fears, and then but other things are just. So I mean, I know I can just, you know, give myself. I'm better about it, but I can give myself an anxiety attack over just the dumbest things, you know.
Really?
Yeah, just stupid stuff, you know. And I should know better. I think we all do it, though. We all have our little, you know, sort of,
for sure,
weaknesses or whatever, you know, clinks in our armor. So
chinks in the armor. We all got them.
Yeah,
we all got them.
Well,
so what do you think? Looking ahead, what we got? What do you?
So we can, you know, moving forward, we can, you know, keep talking a little bit about monsters and stuff, but like we could just start directly on some monsters. We get a kind of a schedule, and then we can systematically start talking about. We could do a section on like witches, and then do like, you know, all the different types of witches cross culturally, and then we could go on to cryptids, or we could talk about vampires or zombies, and do some comparative and contrasting. And I mean, given that the fact that there's so many out there, I mean, we could spend a lifetime talking about them.
I'm excited, man. I'm excited to hear about them. I'm excited to learn about them. I'm excited to be able to talk to you more, you know, when we record these and everything. You're my guy. You're my homeboy.
Yeah.
It's really cool to be doing this with you.
Oh my God, this is so much fun.
I appreciate this, man. This is gonna be fun, man. Can't wait for you all out there listening or watching. I can't wait for y'all to be a part of this for sure.
It's gonna be a community thing. We'll all
definitely.
Yeah. Well, you know.
Yeah, we'll get the YouTube page up and going. We'll get an email address so people can, you know what I mean, maybe email in some questions and suggestions and all that kind of stuff, and make it official, man. You know, make it official.
Let's make it happen.